much. I will share my screen with you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting me. I would like to obviously respect the protocol and greet all the eminent presence of various representatives of the Nigerian personalities that are present today or are behind this event. And I'm going to just go straight into my presentation by highlighting some of the issues that are very pertinent to what we've been talking about. Gloria's presentation has highlighted a very interesting global context, which we all have to be very much aware in order to fit what we are trying to do in this context. And the reason why I looked at particularly at the rural tourism context, I mean, the brief I was given was to fit my presentation within the year of rural tourism that is being promoted by the UNWTO, but also kind of reflect on my own experiences of moving from discussion, from rhetoric into action. That has been pretty much what I've been doing over the past 6 months. Indeed, rural tourism is being promoted as the way forward for diversification, as Gloria mentioned, within the Sustainable Development Goals, and trying to look at the various components of how we could use the rural context as a way to further develop the sector. Now, there is always been, and I talk from experience of working in Nigeria as much as in many other locations around the world. I mean, I've been probably invited. You need to reduce your volume on your microphone, please. So what I was saying is one of the reasons probably I was invited to present to this forum is because of my experience of working in about 22 countries across Africa. So I've been given the privilege of kind of appreciating the diversity of destination across Africa. But one thing that has become very evident to me is that there has been always a very common misconception of what rural tourism is, what green tourism is, and how do we move across the, I would say, the various shades of green, hence the title of my presentation. And one of the things which I think is fundamental in this particular COVID pandemic time and how we're going to move out of this is how do we use this particular moment to stop, reflect, and possibly use the rural context as a way for diversification, for obviously community development, and for something which obviously is very important, which is also gender inclusion and equality in rural setting. The photographs you see in this slide come from across African destinations, from Namibia to Kenya to various other locations. But when we look at a particular context such as green tourism in rural settings, we need to be very careful that this is not taken out from the wider context in which we operate in tourism. And hence why on the left-hand side of this slide, you will see that rural tourism is part of a very strong, I would say, ecosystem, which is formed by all the different components of what tourism should and could be, particularly in settings as Nigeria. And of course, you know, the misconception that we do have, the confusion we have between various terminology, which very often has been caused by us academics coming out with all these great definitions. In terms of implementation at destination level, we need to make sure that when we develop whatever new product or whatever new strategy, we bear in mind the integration of those products within the wider tourism ecosystem. So, of course, when we talk about green rural tourism, from rhetoric to practice, we need to look at what our, I would say, setting presents. And if you look at particular locations like the Nigerian context, you know, it is obvious how various products like wildlife, game viewing, ecologists, cultural heritage, arts and crafts, gastronomy, education, and many more can be part of the multifaceted portfolio of product that we can still work with. I mean, these were there before COVID, they're going to be there after COVID. And it's about understanding how do we shift our understanding and action in a coordinated way. One of the other issues that I've encountered in my work in many African destinations is the attempt to implement a lot of copycat type of intervention. You know, an example is if destinations like Rwanda started with a strategy to develop their mice context, every single destination across the African continent looked at developing their own mice sector and entering into a regional competition, which since the very beginning I found somehow unhealthy and somehow unhelpful, when actually the distinctiveness of each destination in Africa should be really part of the conversation. So pre-COVID, we already looked at the fact that authenticity and sustainability were very much what was at the focus of work that we were engaging with. I mean, 10 years ago, I had the privilege of working in a project that looked at the mapping of destinations in the area of Badagry, obviously, where you'll be very familiar with the slave trade, heritage, but also looking at the rurality aspect of the area. And of course, this was very much in keeping with what is being very much the feel now of where we should be moving at. And of course, as time has moved and as we have been experiencing various forms of strategic move towards diversifying products, what we have been really much appreciating is the fact that consciousness and responsibility has become part of, I would say, an agenda pushed by a number of international organizations such as the WTTC and the WTO, but also has become very much part of the integrated strategy of many destinations which want to work within the Sustainable Development Goals framework. They want to use tourism as a vehicle to sustainable development. But what I feel that is missing sometimes is the fact that when we look at destinations which are trying to do this practically, and Kenya, and particularly, I mean, these example of how you embed women within the tourism sector, or climate change into finding ways to develop product which are obviously innovative in the way they are performed and sold in the global market. What I found very difficult is to understand how, for instance, all those interventions that have been taking place pre-COVID could be actually enhanced and obviously utilized during COVID and after COVID. I have felt in some of the conversation that I've been engaging in over the past 6 months is that there has been almost an attempt of reinventing the will. And this is not an accusation. It's like almost trying to understand, almost like, where did we go wrong? But this is not about where did we go wrong. This is about understanding how we face a critical moment which have taken all of us by surprise, and of course, how we move forward. So an example of an initiative that I was engaged with during COVID was the Building Bridges for Sustainable Tourism in Africa, an initiative which was initiated as a collaboration between Akwasi Ajam, who is the CEO of the Ghana Tourism Authority, and myself, but that involved about 40 stakeholders across the African continent. We engaged in a number of activities, some of which were obviously very much addressing the pandemic crisis, so the making people responsible and creating awareness. So the Rock Your Mask campaign that Ghana Tourism Authority, for instance, launched was an example of how we try to address this at local level, you know, making people aware of the risk, but also making the destination safer. Another example is the one that I'm going to play a video in a second, which is the Responding to COVID MSME Stabilization and Acceleration Program in Kenya. And I'm going to let Job, our collaborator from SCTA Kenya, to tell you a short story about it.
Tourism is an important sector for developing and least developed countries, especially in its ability to create employment. SMEs play a very big role in this because 60 to 80% of employment in developing and least developed countries is connected to SMEs. If SMEs are not supported by policy, in market access, funding, and capacity building for sustainable operations, they become very vulnerable. And they will be the first to disappear from the tourism value chain if they are exposed to shocks, similar to the one we have seen with COVID-19. The SME Stabilization and Acceleration Program by SCTA, University of Brighton, and other partners is a multi-partnership program that is meant to support SMEs to be resilient, grow, and thrive in the tourism value chain of Africa. The program is a multi-partnership program because the different organizations bring in different skills, knowledge, and resources such as tools that are meant to make the program more effective and more valuable to SMEs. Thank you.
So, what did we do? We highlighted during the Building Bridges for Sustainable Tourism in Africa one particular important aspect, the need to support SMEs. So the action we took was to create a targeted project which would end based on capacity building, which would work with TOSC, which is the tourism operators of Kenya, to actually address some of the shortfalls which were obviously in understanding how to navigate the pandemic. What we are doing now is to work with partners and potentially seeking funding to support the scaling up of these initiatives to other African destinations, because we have come to the conclusion that as the role of SMEs, as Job highlighted in the video, is fundamental to make tourism restart as soon as possible. Another interesting activity in which we were involved before COVID kicked in was working with a number of organizations involved in the art sector. And we, in terms of diversifying the market pre-COVID, we were looking at the growing contemporary art sector of West Africa. So what did we do? We started working with the artists of global reputation, which come from West Africa. And of course, trying to identify ways in which themselves could become the champion and the ambassadors for those destinations. And of course, during COVID, we've continued working. Of course, nobody can travel at the moment. Nobody can have those cross-cultural interaction, which are so fundamental in our knowledge exchange. But we've continued working with partners across the world and in the African continent to continue with those dialogues that affect problems that affect the rural environment. So this is where the link with the natural environment of those destinations, or thematic areas which affects those destinations, which are part of those artists' performative art, contemporary art sector. And of course, what we did, for instance, is to concentrate our attention in trying to work as researchers, but also as practitioners, to try and support the enhancement of this sector. So much so that at the University of Brighton, we've been able to secure scholarship funds to support students. And Clive Alonso is an example of this. He's a student of Nigerian background who, after a very highly competitive work, was sponsored, received a full scholarship to start working on a piece of research that would work with the Nigeria, Ghana, and other destinations in West Africa to understand how contemporary arts could truly become a strong component in the new tourism sector, in the new, in quotation marks, tourism sector of this part of the world. So to conclude, there are some reflection we need to make in terms of the future of travel. In the last few months, we've been talking about recovery, reopening, rebuilding, you name it. The reality is that when we come to reinventing whatever we need to reinvent, is the fact that we need to have skill captain at the head of these particular contexts. We need to have skill captain that don't keep making the same mistake again and again, because as Albert Einstein said many years ago, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So in terms of the new era of tourism, you know, one of the other hats which I've had since 2005 is to be a specialist of niche tourism. And it gives me great pleasure to see that niche tourism is becoming more and more the way to go in the future. But reality is that we need to focus on two core things: safety and trust. Safety and trust, which again are a great component of what we believe should be the future of tourism today. Safety, sustainability, and responsibility in tourism will be more and more the new normal. But one of the things that I believe strongly should be very much at the focus of what we do, whether we talk about rural tourism, whether we talk about art and culture, whether we talk about my sector or whatever it is, we need to find ways in which the responsibility of individuals, I mean, players such as who shape the future of tourism, but also consumers are actually informed and educated in the way to move forward. This is not about only restarting tourism. This is about making an impact on ways in which tourism can really truly make a difference in the way tourism in Africa is developed, but also very much trying to understand how we're going to move forward in the future post-pandemic. Thank you.